Andy Burnham has officially been crowned as our new Prime Minister, making a speech outside Downing Street. Burnham attacked neoliberalism, would build council houses, and claimed his first instruction would be to end rough sleeping.
A new political model and a new economic model. In the 1980s, Britain took some wrong turns. Political power was centralised, economic power privatised, large parts of the country deindustrialised, and they still haven't recovered. Build a new economy where we put life's essentials back under stronger public control to make them affordable to you again. Reindustrialising Britain, using public procurement to back British industry. And we will build more council homes. That is the fair and sustainable way to bring the welfare bill down, to meet our fiscal rules. I will soon go through that door behind me and issue my first instruction to end rough sleeping in our country. Let's build a new national sense of unity, of common purpose and positivity. Let us make this the moment when Britain starts to believe again, the moment we bring back hope. Thank you very much, everybody.
When Burnham became Labour leader, his speech focused on ending factionalism. Despite this, there have already been briefings against him. Some of his own supporters fret that his transition to government has been dominated by a policy vacuum, indecision in his inner circle, a high-profile falling out with one of his main allies, and a nascent rebellion from Labour's left flank. The faction that fought to get him the job in the first place. Several people who supported Burnham's candidacy said they were concerned by how he and a circle of close advisors were conducting themselves. They had many broader allies of planning for power appearing at odds with his commitment to inclusivity, the people said. One accused Burnham and his team of doing the opposite of his promise to decentralise power. Many were anticipating who Burnham would pick as Chancellor, showing us what type of government he wants to lead. Many believe that Ed Miliband would have been the choice. Instead, John Healey has been appointed. He was the former Defence Secretary, which Ed Miliband will occupy. One MP said it risked disappointing those who thought Burnham would govern more radically. Another warned it didn't bode well for the rest of the party if Burnham treats a key supporter who was integral to his ascent to power in that manner. The left-wing mainstream campaign group, which backed Burnham, warned on Friday that it wants to see a progressive chancellor, quote-unquote, who, quote-unquote, understands the threat that climate breakdown poses, an implicit endorsement of Miliband. Burnham hasn't announced his cabinet yet, but the more important aspect of his leadership is the team he has chosen around him, specifically his chief of staff. Burnham has chosen corporate lobbyist James Purnell, who previously led Flint Global, a lobbying and advisory firm. Their clients include Apple, Amazon, BP, Google, Microsoft, Uber, and Thames Water. Purnell supported the invasion of Iraq. He was the ex-chair of Labour Friends of Israel and supported PFI. Burnham also appointed Alison Phillips, former CEO of Labour Together, the right-wing group that destroyed Corbyn and elevated Starmer to power. Burnham has curated this man of the people aura, yet according to former advisor David Lammy, he is very well known to the ruling elites.
Do you think we will see a change in attitude toward foreign policy?
One of the things that I was quite struck by when I was working for David Lammy as Foreign Secretary and travelling extensively in the Gulf is that Andy Burnham is very well known to the ruling elites in Qatar and the UAE because they've invested so much in Manchester and in particular its football clubs. They're often flying in to see games at Man City from the UAE, and they view him as an excellent economic diplomat. And were asking us, and this is a long time before Andy Burnham was beginning his long road to Downing Street, was Labour intending to make the UK as great a place to do business in as Manchester? So he's already been an economic diplomat for a long time.
Wow. So a lot happening on that front. Let's bring in Curtis. Curtis, what are your thoughts about Burnham's speech?
I think my first thought is he seemed quite nervous. And look, that's fair enough. You're addressing the nation as prime minister for the first ever time. I guess it's because he's been outside the Westminster bubble for a long time and he's coming in. It's not that important, but it's something I picked up upon. Look, let's take the speech for what it is, and then we can talk about the background stuff. His speech was pretty left wing in terms of rhetoric. I'm not going to lie to you. Um, Someone in our chat actually said it's whispers of Corbyn and Polanski. In fact, his announcement that his first instruction will be to end rough sleeping is a direct copy of what Jeremy Corbyn said he would do. He said multiple times now, Corbyn, that his first instruction as prime minister is to end homelessness in Britain, and that was something that, like, it raised the hair on the back of my neck because politicians have long forgotten vulnerable people, especially homeless people. And you can even see, I know again, Twitter's not real life, but the response to Andy Burnham saying that he wants to end rough sleeping is, well, he doesn't really speak for me, or it's childish politics. Crazy stuff. I mean, it's not childish politics, is it? It's a basic compassion. Something that was missing from Keir Starmer, of all of his speeches, he never once spoke about or really spoke about homelessness. So, yes, on terms of rhetoric, very good. I like the fact that he specifically said council housing. He didn't say affordable housing. He didn't say social housing. It's not the first time he said it. He said council housing. That's really important. He used the term neoliberalism. In our interview with Andy Burnham and Callum Taylor, he said he wanted to end neoliberalism. He said it multiple times, and the speech, along with his leadership speech, was very much about attacking Thatcherism, and that's what he did. He said, with the 1980s, we took wrong decisions, and essentially what he means is privatization. So you got end to neoliberalism. He's talking about council houses, and he's talking about ending rough sleeping. In terms of rhetoric, that is really, really good. And I can tell you right now, that speech wouldn't have happened without Zach Polanski. The so-called leftward turn, we'll get into that in a second, but the so-called left-wing turn of the Labour Party is down to Zach. Because why would the Labour Party pretend to be more left-wing? Because they've realised they're losing votes to the Greens, and also because of Zach Polanski's leadership, he's forced this to happen. I think the one thing that Andy Burnham understands, in which Keir Starmer either didn't understand or didn't care, is that he needs left-wing voters. And I think Andy Burnham acknowledges that. So that's the rhetoric, that's the speech. But what about the appointments? What about the things behind the scenes? Well, that's where it gets a bit more complicated, a bit more worrying. And I think that it speaks to who Andy Burnham is. James Purnell is a corporate lobbyist. He's a pro-Israel guy, as you pointed out, supports PFI, the Iraq War, whatever. The guy, one of his clients for Flint was Thames Water. Right now, Andy Burnham says we might need to nationalise Thames Water, and you've got a guy whose one of his clients was to make Thames Water money. Now, apparently, James Purnell has no connection with it anymore, but I suppose that doesn't really matter because if part of your job was to make Thames Water money, and now you want to turn around and take out the corporate profits from privatized water, there seems to be a massive conflict of interest. Alison Phillips, another person, she is the CEO, or either former or current CEO of Labour Together. They're not called Labour Together anymore because they realised the brand is so toxic. But Labour Together is the right wing group that created Keir Starmer, that was set out to destroy Jeremy Corbyn. It was Morgan McSweeney's project. Now, if you want a clean break from Keir Starmer, you shouldn't have any of these people near your top team. Okay. Now, appointing people to cabinet is one thing, but that can change. I mean, remember that Keir Starmer had I forget her name now. The first chancellor shadow chancellor he had was seen as the left wing chancellor. I'm so sorry. I'm still in holiday mode, so I forgot my name. Forgot names of people. But actually, I'm sure chat will probably correct me. So if anyone in chat knows who I'm talking about, she was seen as the left wing person to be in Starmer's cabinet, or shadow cabinet, should I say, and be shadow chancellor. That doesn't matter because he then replaced her with Rachel Reeves. So cabinet picks is less important to me because they can change. Advisors who stick around, that's more important. And advisors so far is James Purnell and Alison Phillips, who are basically just Keir Starmer continuity. So I don't have much hope that Annalise Dodds, there we go. I knew someone was going to say Annalise Dodds, right? She was seen as the lefty, and she quickly went. Of course, when it comes to his current, I mean, the cabinet's still being picked, right? But choosing John Healey as chancellor was quite a surprising one. I think. I don't think anyone expected that. It was basically Ed Miliband. That was the expected person. That was like the left wing choice. Or Shabana Mahmood. Now, Shabana Mahmood made absolutely no sense. The political class, by the way, seemed to love her. They're like, regardless of your politics, Shabana's really impressive. No, no, no. She's awful. Her immigration policies are vile. I believe she's staying now as Home Secretary, which is incredibly worrying. And Ed Miliband was the obvious choice to show that the Labour Party was moving more towards the left. Now, I can understand why Burnham didn't pick Ed Miliband for now. Ed Miliband is still the guy that lost the 2015 general election. He's not very popular. And of course, the bond markets. The bond markets would have lost their shit over Ed Miliband. It's ridiculous that we're in hock to the bond markets, but I think that was the point. John Healey is someone who's not going to affect the bond markets, largely because no one expected him to be the choice. But ultimately, you don't want to be in hock to the bond markets. You want to change policy. And I think that John Healey is just going to be a guy who is going to want to spend those money in defense. I mean, he was former foreign secretary, right? Now he's in charge of the treasury. He's going to be spending loads of money, I think, on foreign affairs and defense. In fact, I can easily see one of the first policies coming out is to cut welfare spending and increase defense, which is what Andy Burnham said he was probably going to do. He said he wasn't squeamish of doing that. So that was something he already thought about. So maybe he had John Healey in his sights already. Who knows? But ultimately, it's only half a shadow cabinet, and again, it can change. But this is a group of people who doesn't inspire confidence of real change, despite the rhetoric. Now, you have to remember, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, they all made speeches in opposition about ending neoliberalism. They didn't specifically use the term neoliberalism, but they were saying stuff like leaving everything to the market has been wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. We need to use the states to invest, an active state. They said all the right things. And some people were even fooled that, oh, this will be an end of neoliberalism. But it wasn't really, was it? Because so much public procurement was, sent out to private tender. And notice the clever wording that Andy Burnham is using in his speech, or in many of his speeches, actually, which is that we need more public control. And that doesn't fill me with confidence because he's not saying nationalisation, he's saying public control. What does that mean? It doesn't mean nationalisation. So it's all up in the air. Excuse me. It's all up in the air. I think the cabinet so far shows there's not going to be much change. His advisors show it's going to be continuity Starmer, but the rhetoric's different. So I think that is Andy Burnham in a nutshell. He's got a left-wing aura about him, right? He's got this like he's left-wing coded. That's why he's popular. That's why in the Makerfield by-election it was all about Andy Burnham, not Labour, because for some reason he's left-wing coded, even though he's not. So I don't expect much change, to be honest.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. There is something like relatively fascinating about Burnham now picking to talk the language of neoliberalism and criticize the mechanisms behind that. It's like what you said. He is very, very he knows what he needs to say to kind of get people on side, and that's why I do feel like he's a little bit vibesy. He's very left-wing coded, and I think there is something to be said about the adopting the rhetoric of Corbyn and, like you said, Polanski, which is a really great point. That he knows the Greens have shifted or are wanting to shift the Overton window left. And the reason why Labour failed so miserably is because they were trying so hard to chase towards the right. The Overton window shifting right, Labour trying to do that, and then they ended up losing their loyal base. So we'll see what happens, but we need to remember that Andy Burnham is a politician who has spent the last 20 years essentially leading the insurgency against Britain's economic consensus. He is someone who was involved in all of with privatization and just the things that I
Well,
think
he was
yeah, go ahead.
Well, he was health secretary, and he I think he funded a hospital in Manchester through private procurement. Like he's not hostile to privatization.
He's not.
In fact, like he used a bastardization of his own joke, right? Which is that a Blairite, a Corbynite, a Starmerite turns up in the bar. What will you have, Burnham? And that's kind of what he is. I've not seen any signal that he's going to really, really change. Now, in
No.
terms of Manchester, because I don't know what this so-called Manchesterism is, and he did great on the buses, okay, but a lot of his investment he brought was foreign finance capital. Because go back to that clip of the former aide to David Lammy, he said he's very well known to like the foreign elites, and that again scares the shit out of me because that's kind of what he did when he so-called brought in lots of social housing. It was all based on finance capital, money from abroad, and they weren't even affordable homes. Like the target was like 7,000 affordable homes, and they got like 10% of it. So there's a lot of red herrings when it comes to Andy Burnham's mayoralty. It wasn't that good. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't that good. And he doesn't, to me, show that he really offers a break from neoliberalism,
No.
despite saying that. So I,
Yeah.
I think he's kind of going to be Starmer 2.0 with maybe a bit more charisma. Although again, he seemed very nervous in his speech there.
Very nervous because I think he knows that there's a lot of eyes on him. And you're absolutely right. This is someone who has spent years inside New Labour, a government that essentially embraced these market mechanisms in public services, expanded private finance through, like you said, PFI, and deregulated parts of the economy. So I have my reservations about Andy, and I think it's one of those things that we just have to wait and see. Do I think he wants to win back the Labour base? I do, but then if you're sticking with the the same sort of cabinet that was surrounding Starmer, then I question what's going to happen going forward. But I do find it ironic that people were mocking Polanski and the Greens and Corbyn for the language around neoliberalism, and I wonder if he's going to be met with the same sort of mockery. Will people go, "Oh, neoliberalism? What the fuck are you talking about?" Or yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have seen corporate journos already say stuff like, "Why is he bringing up Margaret Thatcher? Margaret Thatcher grew the economy and left it in a great shape. She didn't actually. Growth was terrible. The economy was in a really bad way." And that's before you get to the fact that she literally ripped out the heart and soul of this nation and gave it to private companies. So even if you were to look at the economy in a very, very mainstream economic way, she didn't grow the economy. It was a really, really bad economy that she left. Unemployment was quite high under Thatcher. A lot of people are saying, why are you talking about Thatcher? She was voted in 40, 50 years ago. The reason why he's correctly bringing up Thatcher is because we've never had a politician or government that's really meaningfully changed things. We know the famous line from Tony Blair, my job is to build from Margaret Thatcher. We know the famous line from Margaret Thatcher, which she said New Labour was her invention. Her greatest achievement was New Labour. And then we had, after New Labour, we had the Conservatives who plunged this nation into chaos with austerity, and 330,000 people were murdered by the state. And then, of course, we had Brexit, and we've had crisis after crisis after crisis. Yeah. I was speaking to Alyssa actually before the show, and she was telling me how the tenure for prime ministers is getting shorter, right? And she told me she watched something online and someone had a hypothesis that the reason why, we're getting shorter prime ministers is because of social media. I don't think that's the case, actually. I don't think social media is contributing to that. Obviously, the argument is, well, people's attention spans are getting shorter. We want change quicker. But there are many countries around the world in which they have long-term governments and, some prime ministers serve their full 2 terms. I think in this country, uniquely, we have lots of prime ministers. It's because we have a unique problem with the set of crises we face. We've had the crisis of privatization and neoliberalism. We've had the crisis of austerity. We've had the crisis of Brexit. So all these things compounded together, and you've got politicians who are like, we're not going to meaningfully change things. Then, of course, it's going to do that. And also, older people decide elections. So if younger people are usually on social media, then I don't think that the rise of social media has caused shorter term prime ministers, because older people are deciding elections. The biggest issue for Keir Starmer, the beginning of his downfall, was scrapping the winter fuel allowance. Okay, so it's not the fact that he didn't change things quick enough, although he should have. I think the downfall of Keir Starmer was making the wrong decision. And I think that's something that Andy Burnham might not do. Like, he might not make really, really bad decisions, but that doesn't mean it's good enough. It means he might be able to serve a full term, but we obviously need radical change in this country.
Let me be very clear here. Who am I? Starmer. He was the most unclear individual that was at 10 Downing Street, and his own hamasha, his fatal flaw was just his inability to make decisions. I think he failed miserably. He had no charisma, no backbone, very slimy. So we'll see what Andy does. Did you want to unpack more about whether he'll be Starmer 2.0? But I feel like you've answered that somewhat already, but maybe you can unpack it further.
Well, I do want to quickly mention about homelessness. I think there are people going out there and attacking him, saying, well, he doubled homelessness in Greater Manchester. That's not true. So he became Manchester Mayor in 2017. I'm going to pull up the graphic actually on my screen just so I can remember. So in 2017, he was elected and he pledged to end rough sleeping by 2020. He reduced it, looking by the numbers, by a significant amount. That's it, by 57%. Now, of course, he missed the target. He said he'd end homelessness and rough sleeping by 2020, but he reduced it by 60%. And then, of course, from 2020, it climbed up, and now it's about 20%, about 20% less than it was in 2017. You do have to remember that obviously we housed many people during the pandemic, and then we just kicked people out. So obviously the pandemic did have an issue. Yes, he failed on his pledge to end rough sleeping by 2020, but he did reduce it by 60%. So I don't think it's like, people attacking him for that. At the end of the day, I think reducing it by 60% is better than nothing. I have no reason to believe that he won't try his hardest on that. Like, I do think he really believes in that. But of course, whilst this is such an important issue, we still have multiple crises, namely the climate crisis, and he doesn't have Ed Miliband as Chancellor. And that's the thing, right? If you don't have Ed Miliband as Chancellor, what's going to happen is Ed Miliband is going to be the same kind of... He's going to play the same role as he did under Keir Starmer. Say like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this and that, but he doesn't have control of the finances. And now it's looking like that Andy Burnham might start drilling in the North Sea. And that's something that's worrying people. Now, apparently the reason why... I know we want to move on, but apparently the reason why Ed Miliband... apparently the reason why Ed Miliband wasn't chosen as Chancellor is because there was lobbying to stop Ed Miliband from becoming Chancellor, because there is friction between the unions and Ed Miliband's. Lots of unions want to drill the North Sea. They think it will create jobs, and they think that net zero and green energy is a job killer. This is where unions don't always have the right side of history. In fact, Jackdaw would only create 27 jobs. So the unions are wrong on this, by the way. Even if they wanted to come from a workers' jobs protection angle, like, it's not going to create much jobs. And of course, drilling for North Sea, thanks to Thatcher, because she sold that shit off, it doesn't mean that we get to reap the benefits of drilling in the North Sea. It's going on to the international markets. So when it goes on to the international market, who's going to get it? It might not be us, and it's still going to be subjected to the price mechanisms of the global financial market. So it's not going to save us any money. I think it's more virtue signaling, because a lot of right-wing politicians are supporting it. Rupert Lowe's like, oh, well done, Andy, this is actually quite good. So locking out Ed Miliband means he's going to play the same cut role, which is like, oh, we need to do more green stuff, but he has no control of the finances. So Ed Miliband is going to be an irrelevant piece in this puzzle, unless Burnham is thinking in a year's time we're going to bring him in. I don't know. Not sure.